At Stonebrook Grill, under honey gold lights, she struck me across the cheek, directly beneath the ceiling camera's red eye. "You deserved it, just like your real mom did," she whispered, teeth bright in a perfect smile. I dabbed the blood, activated my watch's recorder, and said just loud enough for the mic, 8:41 p.m., table 17, thanks for the timestamp. They thought I'd be silent. They didn't know I write the rules for people who think they're above them. My name is Avery Lane. I am 32 years old, and on this Friday evening, I was an instrument of compliance. I came straight from the office, from Kestrel North Holdings, the investment firm that held the leash on my father's empire. My gray flannel trousers were sharp, my silk blouse immaculate, my employee ID badge, a scannable rectangle of plastic and data, was still clipped to the waistband of my trousers, a quiet reminder of where my true allegiance lay. The restaurant was Stonebrook Grill, the crown jewel of Everline's dining scene. It was all dark wood, muted gold lighting, and the hushed reverence of old money. We weren't in the main dining room. We were in Section 17, a private room walled off by heavy, frosted glass. The glass blurred the outside world into abstract smears of light and motion, isolating us. It was a perfect, sound-dampened box. Above our table, recessed in a dark-stained ceiling beam, was the camera. It was a high-resolution, wide-angle model, chosen by Lane Meridian Group's own security division. I knew the specs. I had approved the purchase order. Its tiny red indicator light, a single pinprick of crimson, blinked with metronomic regularity. Once every 1.5 seconds, I had timed it on a previous visit. It was a silent digital witness, always watching, always recording. My father, Graham Lane, cleared his throat. He smoothed his tie, his eyes flickering between me and his wife, Vera. He looked tired, his power diluted by the woman beside him. "Avery," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, swallowed by the thick carpet and heavy drapes. "No drama tonight, please. It's a celebration." A celebration of what? He hadn't specified. Another quarterly report, another successful evasion, another Friday. Vera smiled. It was her signature expression, the one pasted across billboards for the Lane Foundation, the one she used in boardroom meetings and at charity galas. It was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, brilliant white and perfectly even. It held no warmth, no life. It was the polished, threatening display of a predator. "Graham, darling, she knows," Vera said, her voice a syrupy drawl. "We're just family, having a quiet family dinner." She reached across the table to pat his hand, her diamonds flashing in the low light. I said nothing. I simply placed my hands in my lap and waited. The air in the room was thick, compressed. The appetizers arrived on heavy ceramic plates. A young waiter, his black jacket slightly too large in the shoulders, moved with nervous precision. He placed a small plate of seared foie gras in front of me. As he leaned in to retrieve the empty bread plates, his movement created a brief, choreographed interruption. It was all Vera needed. In that half-second of distraction, her left hand shot out under the heavy linen tablecloth. Her fingers, cold and strong, clamped around my wrist. It was a familiar vice, a gesture of casual ownership and sudden threat. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I simply paused, my own hand hovering over my water glass, my gaze fixed on the center of the table. Then came the second part. Her other hand, knuckles hard and bony, delivered a short, brutal, practiced punch just below my left rib cage. It wasn't a slap. It was a blow, efficient, targeted, designed to steal breath, not to leave a visible mark. It was the kind of violence that lives in shadows and under tables, the kind that allows the perpetrator to smile placidly while the victim fights for air. The air punched out of my lungs in a silent gasp. The pain was sharp, radiating outward, a sudden, sickening bloom. But I refused to gasp. I refused to double over. I held myself perfectly still, my spine rigid. Instead, I lifted my gaze, slowly, deliberately. I looked past Vera's triumphant, knowing smirk. I looked past my father's face, his eyes suddenly fascinated by the wine list, his entire being a monument to willful ignorance. I looked directly into the small, black lens of the ceiling camera. I let it see my face, my composure, the slight, pained tension in my jaw. Then I raised my left wrist, the one she wasn't gripping, bringing my smartwatch close to my mouth. The watch face was dark. "Recording on," I whispered. The words were a tiny puff of condensation on the cool glass. "Table 17, 8:39 p.m. The internal microphone was sensitive enough to catch a whisper, and I had just created a time-stamped, geolocated audio file. My movement, my whisper, the sheer, frozen tension of the tableau, had shifted the room's gravity. At the frosted glass door, the hostess, a young woman with a meticulously organized clipboard, had paused mid-stride. Her professional smile froze, her eyes fixed on our table. Sensing the disruption she couldn't quite see or hear, she was a witness to the atmosphere, if not the act. Through the service pass-through, a slim, rectangular opening to the bar. The bartender stopped polishing a wine glass. He was looking right at me, his expression flat, unreadable. He had seen my face. He had seen me speak into my watch. He was an accidental, and therefore perfect, audience. Both were now file-noted in my mind. Vera sensed the shift. She had lost the element of surprise, the cover of the waiter's movement. She released my wrist, her fingernails scraping lightly against my skin. She leaned in, the scent of her perfume, an expensive, cloying cloud of Chanel No. 5, washing over me. This was the second act, the performance part. She knew the camera was there. She had to. She had helped design the restaurant's decor, but she believed it was her camera, her husband's asset, a tool of her domain. She believed it was blind to her, or worse, that it agreed with her. She smiled, that brilliant, terrible, white smile. And then her open hand cracked across my cheek. The sound was sharp, definitive, like a gavel striking wood. It echoed in the small, quiet room. My head snapped to the side from the force, honey gold light exploding behind my eyes, and a sudden, hot stinging raced across my skin. Then came the whisper. It was not a shout. It was worse. It was intimate, venomous, and delivered with perfect, theatrical enunciation. She angled her face just right, leaning in as if sharing a secret, projecting her voice perfectly for the high-sensitivity microphone I knew was concealed within the camera's housing. She wasn't just hitting me. She was creating a record. She was teaching. "You deserved it," she hissed, the words coating my ear. "Just like your real mom did, a lesson you both needed to remember." I tasted copper. Her ring had split the inside of my lip. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I didn't raise a hand. I kept my breathing even, a cold, still point in the center of the radiating pain. I let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. I let the camera capture her smug, righteous satisfaction and my father's paralyzed, cowardly silence. He was still studying the wine list, as if the perfect Cabernet could erase the sound of the blow. Slowly, my fingers perfectly steady, I reached for my phone, which was face down on the table. I had placed it there earlier, angled just so. I slid it off the linen and into my lap, under the tablecloth, hidden from their view. I double-tapped the side button. A single, haptic buzz vibrated against my thumb. It was done. The encrypted file, containing the audio from my watch and the video from my phone's forward-facing camera, which I'd angled perfectly to capture the under-table view, was now uploading. It was streaming via a secure, masked connection to the off-site server. The server was owned by Linden & Fox, the external counsel I had retained months ago. The file was already out of the building. It was already in their hands. The rest of the meal was a grotesque pantomime. My father, finally looking up, began talking about a new acquisition in the Lane Meridian Group. Vera, energized and radiant after her assertion of dominance, critiqued the wine. Sending the first bottle back, I held a linen napkin to my cheek. pretending to wipe away a spill, the white cloth slowly soaking up a small dark bloom of blood from my mouth. When the bill finally came, presented in a leather folio, Graham produced his black corporate card, the Lane Meridian Group corporate card, the one I had a file on. Vera smiled as he signed. The sound of the pen a dry, arrogant scratch across the paper. "Such a lovely evening, darling," she said to him, touching my father's arm. I memorized the details, the merchant code, the timestamp, the total. Using a corporate asset during the commission of an assault and battery, it was beautifully, stupidly, fatally arrogant. It was the link I needed, tethering her personal violence to the corporate entity. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was flat, metallic. "I need some air." I stood, my chair making no sound on the thick carpet. I walked, not ran, to the women's restroom. The marble was cold and gray, the lighting unforgivingly bright. In the mirror, my reflection stared back. Cold and focused, the red mark on my cheek was already darkening. The clear imprint of her fingers. My lip was split, a thin line of red. I pressed the bloody napkin to the cut. Then I lifted my phone. Click. A photo of the injury, close-up. The metadata would stamp the time and exact GPS coordinates. Click. A second photo, this one of my reflection in the mirror. I framed it carefully. In the shot, clear as day, was my own bruised face, the bloodied tissue held to my mouth, and in the polished chrome of the light fixture above me, I captured the tiny, perfectly reflected dome of the hallway security camera. Another angle, another witness, another truth. I tossed the bloodied napkin into the wastebasket, a single splash of red on a pile of white paper towels. I straightened my blouse. I walked back to the table. They were standing. Graham helping Vera with her expensive wool coat, his hands gentle on her shoulders. He was already protecting her. He was already erasing the last 5 minutes. "Ready, Avery?" my father asked. He didn't meet my eye. He was looking at a point just past my shoulder. "Yes," I said. "I have everything I need." I walked out of the room ahead of them, my steps even and measured. My employee badge tapped softly against my hip with every step, a steady, rhythmic beat, counting down the seconds to their ruin. The drive home from Stonebrook Grill was quiet. The only sounds the smooth hum of my Tesla's electric engine and the soft click of the turn signal. My cheek throbbed with a low, insistent pulse, a physical counterpoint to the city lights of Everline blurring past my window. The city was a shrine to my father's success, and by extension, Vera's. Every 5 miles, a billboard illuminated the highway, glowing with a sanctimonious light. The Lane Foundation, building Everline's future. And there they were, Graham and Vera, his arm around her waist, their smiles radiating a manufactured warmth that chilled me to the bone. It was a perfect portrait of the perfect corporate family. I was, of course, nowhere in the frame. I had been photoshopped out of the family narrative long before I learned how to use a server. They were the brand. I was the liability, or so they thought. My mother, Julia, died when I was 18, a tragic accident at the lake house, a slip on wet rocks, the coroner said. While she was alone, the report was clean, concise, and utterly devoid of the truth I knew but couldn't prove. 6 months later, a barely decent interval of performative grief, my father married Vera, the local society pages, fueled by Vera's strategic leaks, called it Graham's second miracle, a resurrection of his spirit, a new chapter. It was, in reality, a hostile takeover. Vera wasn't a miracle. She was a consolidation of assets. While they were honeymooning in Tuscany, posing for photographers and redesigning the family legacy, I was in a cramped studio apartment, surviving on coffee and adrenaline. I didn't go to law school. I couldn't afford the time, and I refused to take his money. I studied at night, every night, for 4 years. I taught myself corporate law, compliance, and forensic accounting. I memorized SEC filings, state-level fiduciary duty statutes, and the intricate, exploitable loopholes in corporate governance. My target was Kestrel North Holdings, not Lane Meridian Group. That would have been too obvious, too sentimental. Kestrel North was the quiet, aggressive investment firm that had acquired a 22% stake in my father's empire during a leveraged buyout 5 years prior. They were the significant minority shareholder. They were the check and balance my father thought he could charm. I got a job in their mailroom, then paralegal work, then junior analyst. Now, I am Avery Lane, head of compliance for Kestrel North. I am the anonymous, gray-suited authority who reviews the internal ethics and financial controls of all portfolio companies, including, and especially, the Lane Meridian Group. My father thought it was a strange, passionless career choice. He patted my head at a Christmas party and said he was proud I'd found my little niche. He had no idea he was patting the hand that was drafting the very regulations that would one day strangle him. Vera, for her part, had been busy with her own form of construction. She turned our family home, the sterile glass and steel mansion I grew up in, into a permanent film set. The living room wasn't a place to live. It was a backdrop for interviews with Everline Society magazine. Every photograph, every holiday card, was a meticulously staged piece of public relations propaganda, reinforcing the brand of the united family. In this performance, I was a prop, a difficult, awkward prop. I was always seated at the very end of the long, polished mahogany table during every public-facing event, every charity dinner, every political fundraiser. It was a clear physical statement of my place in the hierarchy, an afterthought, an obligation. But Vera, in her arrogance, had made a critical error. The seat at the edge of the table, the one pushed to the periphery, was also the one with the clearest, most direct, and most unobstructed line of sight to the ceiling-mounted security cameras. She had placed me in the optimal position for surveillance. She thought she was monitoring me for dissent. She never once considered that I was using her own system to create an archive of her. For years, the abuse was subtle, a masterclass in plausible deniability. It was the small accidents, the full glass of Cabernet Sauvignon accidentally knocked over, flooding the keyboard of my work laptop just hours before a major filing deadline. The quiet comments, just loud enough for me to hear. You have your mother's voice, you know, so sharp, and the physical reminders. The pinch to the back of my arm as I passed her in a hallway, the grip on my wrist under the table, her fingernails digging into my skin, all while she smiled and discussed floral arrangements with a gala planner. Each time, I would look to my father, and each time, he would look away. Vera is just stressed. Avery, he would say later, his voice low, pleading for my complicity. The foundation dinner is next week. She's under enormous pressure. He was the great enabler, the chief financial officer of her cruelty. He signed off on her stress. He signed off on everything. I saw the expense reports, thousands for consulting fees to LLCs that didn't exist, interior design charges from shell companies. He signed and signed, funding her whims, her projects, and her silence. He bought his second miracle and was paying for it in installments, using corporate funds to cover the interest. I stopped seeing family a long time ago. I saw a CEO, Graham, a COO of domestic affairs, Vera, and a hostile internal auditor, me. I learned to measure affection in metadata. I learned to analyze familial relationships by cross-referencing timestamps on security footage with irregular wire transfers. I didn't have a childhood. I had a chain of custody. Tonight at Stonebrook Grill was not the first time she had hit me, not even close. But it was the first time she had been so reckless. It was the first time she had done it in a public, third-party establishment. Under a camera I had the rights to access as part of Kestrel's oversight. It was the first time there were independent, verifiable witnesses, the hostess, the bartender. And it was the first time, in her blinding arrogance, that she had said the words aloud. You deserved it, just like your real mom did. She hadn't just assaulted me, she had provided motive, context, and a clear, unambiguous link to a pattern of past behavior. She had performed for the microphone. I pulled into my dark garage, the Tesla's headlights cutting out, plunging the space into silence. I sat for a long moment, my hand on the door release. The throbbing in my cheek was a steady reminder. In Everline, honor is a brand, reputation is a traded commodity. The Lane family name was a blue-chip stock, stable and reliable, built on a mountain of lies. Tonight, Vera had given me an actionable intelligence event. She had, with her own hand, triggered a catastrophic drop in valuation. And I, as the head of compliance, was now obligated to act. It was time to issue a correction. It was time to revalue everything. My job is not just a title, it's a key. As head of compliance for Kestrel North Holdings, I am the gatekeeper. Kestrel North is what's known as a significant minority investor. We hold 22% of the Lane Meridian Group, my father's sprawling empire of high-end real estate, award-winning restaurants like Stonebrook Grill, and boutique entertainment venues. We are the largest single shareholder outside of the Lane Family Trust itself. My father sees Kestrel as patient capital. He sees me as his quiet, bookish daughter, playing at a corporate job. He's wrong on both counts. Kestrel is an activist investor, and I am a legislator. My specialty is not the flashy courtroom drama of litigation. It is the dense, airless, suffocating prose of corporate bond agreements. It's the fine print in multi-hundred-million-dollar credit facilities. It's the appendices in shareholder agreements that no one, not even the high-priced lawyers, reads past the first page. I am the architect of the rules for the rich, rules they believe they are too powerful to read. 2 years ago, during the Lane Meridian Group's last major debt refinancing, I personally drafted the governance and ethics covenants. My father's CFO, a man named Arthur Vance, was focused on the interest rates and repayment schedules. He skimmed my section, labeled standard governance and compliance provisions, and signed off. He didn't read Appendix D, subsection 14. I call it Clause 14B. It's a beautiful piece of legal engineering. It's written in the driest, most boring legalese possible, but at its core, it is a bomb. It states that a key ethics event can be triggered by any senior officer, director, or their designated spouses. If they are found to have committed an act of verifiable violence, credible harassment, or moral turpitude in a public space, especially if said act occurs on or involves corporate property. Stonebrook Grill is corporate property, owned entirely by the Lane Meridian Group. The dinner, paid for with Graham's corporate card, was a corporate event. Vera, as the spouse of the CEO and the public face of the Lane Foundation, is a designated senior party. Her punch was the act of verifiable violence. And the key ethics event is the trigger. It's the firing pin. When triggered, Clause 14B allows any coalition of minority shareholders holding over 20% of total stock, a threshold Kestrel North conveniently meets all by itself, to bypass the standard board schedule. It grants us the right to call an emergency special session of the board and key stakeholders, to be convened within 48 hours, not weeks, not days, 48 hours. The purpose of this session is singular: to address the ethics violation and assess its immediate material risk to the company's brand, creditworthiness, and shareholder value. It strips away all of my father's power to delay, deflect, or manage the narrative. It moves the battle from the family dinner table to the corporate boardroom, in front of an audience of investors. I didn't just write the clause, I built the infrastructure to support it. 6 months ago, I used Kestrel's operational budget to retain a private data security and forensics firm in Northbridge, a town 2 hours away, far from Everline's interconnected corporate world. They are called Axiom Data Security. They operate a hardened, off-site, air-gapped server. The only data on it is my data, the files I sent tonight, the audio from my watch, the video from my phone, the time-stamped photos of my injuries, the metadata from the restaurant's location, all sit on that server, triple encrypted. Axiom's only job is to receive, store, and upon my signal, distribute that package to a preset list of recipients. The assault was the spark, but the kindling was already piled high. Vera's violence is not an isolated act. It's a symptom of her arrogance, an arrogance that bleeds directly into the company's finances. For the last 3 months, I have been quietly tracking a series of vendor payments that didn't make sense. Lane Meridian's procurement department has 2 employees, a mid-level manager and a senior VP, who have been approving vastly inflated invoices for interior decorating and hospitality consulting at 3 of the group's restaurants. The vendor is a shell company, an LLC registered in Delaware with a mailbox address. It's called Hearthline Services. It took me one night of cross-referencing public filings and bank routing numbers to find the link. The sole beneficiary of Hearthline Services is a private wealth account in a different state, an account held in the name of V. Quinn, Vera's maiden name. She's been siphoning money, $2.4 million over the last 2 quarters, with the help of those 2 procurement employees. She's been stealing from her husband's company, and he's been too distracted, too willfully ignorant, to notice. I had the financial crimes, I had the emails, the invoices, the bank transfers. I had a clear-cut case of fraud. But fraud, in a company this large, can be managed. It can be spun. The employees would be fired. Vera would claim ignorance. My father would pay the money back, call it a bookkeeping error, and the board, comprised of his golfing buddies, would reluctantly accept his apology. It would be messy, but containable. I needed something else. I needed a fire that was so public, so undeniable, and so visceral that it would make the financial crimes impossible to ignore. I needed an accelerant. I needed something that would offend the sensibilities of the stoic, conservative pension fund managers and the independent directors on the board. A white-collar crime is just numbers on a page. But watching a video of the CEO's wife, the pristine face of the company's charity wing, striking her stepdaughter in one of their own flagship restaurants and invoking the name of her dead mother, that is not a bookkeeping error. That is a 5-alarm fire. Vera just handed me the match. The assault is the leverage. The fraud is the kill shot. The assault, documented and verified, triggers Clause 14B. It gets me the emergency meeting. It gets me the full, undivided, and panicked attention of the board. And once I have that attention, I won't be presenting them with a family drama. I will be presenting them with a key ethics event, followed immediately by Exhibit B, the financial malfeasance report. I will link her public violence to her private theft. I will demonstrate a clear pattern of behavior, of arrogance, of utter contempt for the rules. I will show them that the woman who believes she can assault a family member in public is the same woman who believes she can steal $2.4 million. One act proves the character of the other. Corporate revenge is not a passionate, screaming match in a parking lot. It is not a dramatic confrontation. Real revenge, the kind that lasts, the kind that dismantles empires, is a process. It is a series of forms, correctly filed. It is a chain of evidence, meticulously documented. It is a clause, buried on page 84 of an agreement, waiting patiently for its moment to be activated. I have spent my entire adult life building this process. I wrote the protocol for my own justice. And as I sit here in my car, the interior dark, the dashboard lights reflecting in my eyes, the metallic taste of my own blood still on my tongue, I am no longer Avery Lane, the daughter. I am the head of compliance, and I am about to initiate a full-scale audit. The double tap of my thumb against the phone's side button in the Stonebrook Grill restroom was a digital trigger. It was 9:02 p.m. The haptic buzz confirmed the action. That single, simple gesture was the first domino. It wasn't a text message. It was a preset command, a macro I'd built. The command authenticated my identity via the phone's biometric scanner and executed a complex script. It took the raw video file from my phone's camera, the one that had been recording from the table, and the separate, higher-quality audio file from my watch, and bundled them. It bypassed my personal cloud storage, bypassing any server Vera's IT lackeys might one day try to subpoena from me. The script encrypted the bundle and sent it via a secure single-use VPN tunnel directly to a dedicated intake server at Linden & Fox, the external law firm I had retained. A partner, Lila Vance, was on call. She wasn't my friend. She was a shark, and I had paid a significant retainer for her to be awake and waiting tonight. At 9:03 p.m., her firm was in possession of the raw, unedited, time-stamped footage of Vera's assault. The chain of custody was now in the hands of a third-party officer of the court, untouchable. I walked out of the restroom, past my father and Vera, and left the restaurant. The next domino was already waiting. At 9:14 p.m., as my Tesla navigated the dark streets of Everline, my phone buzzed with an automated alert. A new expense had been logged against the Lane Meridian corporate account. Graham, the charge, Stonebrook Grill, $1,472.58. Merchant code, 5812, eating places, restaurants. But I had access to a deeper layer of the company's accounting software. I pulled over, in the internal system. The charge was already coded by Graham's executive assistant, Event ID 449B. Private dinner, shareholder relations. He had just officially, irrevocably categorized an act of battery as a corporate function. He had paid for her assault with shareholder money. I took a screenshot. I encrypted it. I sent it to the Linden & Fox server. Click, another link in the chain. At 9:22 p.m., I sent a simple, anonymous text from a burner SIM to the Stonebrook Grill's shift manager. Check your incident log. A guest in Section 17, Lane Party, was assaulted by another guest. Your hostess and bartender saw the immediate aftermath. Your ceiling camera, model 4K D22, recorded it. Make sure your log is accurate. Your liability depends on it. I knew the manager. He was a stickler for rules. Terrified of lawsuits, he wouldn't ignore it. He would check the camera. He would see the strike. He would interview his hostess. He would see her frozen expression on the footage. He would see the bartender staring. He would immediately create a formal, signed entry. Incident 1117. He would describe a heated family dispute resulting in physical contact. He would sign and date it, officially corroborating my timeline within the restaurant's own internal records. Click. The hallway camera at Stonebrook, the one that had captured my reflection in the restroom mirror, I already had my own photo of that, but I needed the file itself. As a Kestrel compliance officer, I had audit rights over all security systems on properties in our portfolio. At 9:30 p.m., from my car, I logged into the Lane Meridian security mainframe. I navigated to Stonebrook, camera 11H, restroom corridor. I isolated the footage from 8:43 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. There I was, walking toward the restroom, my face clear, the red mark on my cheek, vivid under the fluorescent light, the blood on the napkin unmistakable. I exported the 30-second clip, encrypted it, sent it. Click. My phone lit up, a new message, from Vera, 9:34 p.m. I hope you've learned your lesson. Do not make this a public spectacle. Don't you dare embarrass this family. It was a gift. It wasn't an apology. It was a threat. It was a veiled admission. It acknowledged an event had occurred, one that could become a public spectacle. It displayed consciousness of guilt. I screenshotted the message, encrypted, sent. Click. The next stop was not home. At 9:51 p.m., I pulled into the private ambulance bay of Everline Med, a high-end, 24-hour private emergency clinic that catered to the city's elite. They promised discretion and, more importantly, meticulous, time-stamped digital records. I walked in. The triage nurse saw my face, my split lip, and the blooming bruise, and her expression tightened. What happened? I was assaulted, I said, my voice flat. Punched in the ribs and struck in the face at 8:39 p.m. at Stonebrook Grill. I was now on record. For the next hour, I was a case file. They photographed the contusion on my cheek. They photographed the split on my inner lip. They took x-rays of my left rib cage. The attending physician, a crisp, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Aris, pointed to the screen. You're lucky. No fractures. But you have significant deep tissue bruising. This was a forceful blow. I need a full medical report, I said, including your written assessment of the injuries, the time of their likely infliction, and copies of all photographs and x-rays. I need it for a legal matter. Of course, she said. At 10:47 p.m., I walked out with a digital file on a hospital-issued, encrypted USB drive. Medical report. Avery Lane. Case ID EM9902. Click. I didn't go home. I drove to my office at Kestrel North. The building was empty, the air still and cold. I sat at my desk. The city lights of Everline spread out below me like a circuit board. I slotted the USB drive. I opened my secure connection to the Axiom server in Northbridge. I created a new master file, 14B packet. I uploaded everything. File 001, video, Stonebrook Groar. Audio visual, 41 seconds. File 002, expense log 449B. Financial, JPEG. File 003, Vera text 2134. Admission, JPEG. File 004, Everline Med Report. EM9902, Medical, PDF. File 005, Stonebrook Camera, 11H. Corroboration, MP4. File 006, Hearthline Services Report. Financial Fraud, PDF. I bundled them into the single 14B packet, then I applied the lock. It was a 3-key smart contract I had designed. The packet could not be opened, forwarded, or deleted by Linden & Fox until 3 distinct automated conditions were met. My email to the board secretary was sent. The board secretary's automated receipt email was returned. The automated calendar system sent its emergency meeting notification. The moment the third condition was met, the packet would automatically, irrevocably, and simultaneously be distributed to the 2 independent directors on the Lane Meridian Board, the 2 largest pension fund stakeholders, and Lila Vance at Linden & Fox, a dead man's switch, but for corporate governance. It was 11:13 p.m. I took a deep breath. My ribs ached. My face stung. I was exhausted, but the mechanism was built. It was time to pull the lever. I opened my corporate email. I drafted a new message. To Board Secretary, Lane Meridian Group, CC, General Counsel, Kestrel, North Holdings. Subject, Official Notice, Triggering of Clause 14B, Key Ethics Event. To the Secretary of the Board. This email serves as formal notice, pursuant to Section 14B of the Kestrel North Holdings Shareholder Agreement and related debt covenants, of a key ethics event involving a senior designated party of the Lane Meridian Group. The event, assault and battery, occurred at 8:39 p.m., Friday, October 17th, on corporate property, Stonebrook Grill, and involved the use of corporate funds, Event ID 449B. As per Clause 14B, Kestrel North Holdings, as a 22% stakeholder, formally requests an emergency special session of the board to be convened within 48 hours to address this event and the associated material risk. A full packet of verifiable evidence, 14B packet, will be distributed by external counsel, Linden & Fox, to relevant parties upon confirmation of this meeting. Respectfully. Avery Lane, Head of Compliance, Kestrel North Holdings. My finger hovered over the mouse. This was it. The point of no return. I clicked Send. Time, 11:15 p.m. The response was immediate. The Lane Meridian server, programmed for such legal notices, auto-replied. Time, 11:15 p.m. Your notice has been received and forwarded to the Office of the General Counsel and the Chairman of the Board. Condition 1 and 2 were met. My other screen, monitoring the board's internal calendar system, flickered. The system, governed by the bylaws I knew by heart, recognized the keywords Clause 14B and Emergency Special Session from a qualified stakeholder. It had no choice. It began to populate a new event. Time, 11:17 p.m., a new email blast, sent from the server itself. Notice of emergency special session of the board, convened by Kestrel North Holdings, Sunday, October 19th, 7:30 a.m., location, main boardroom, 28th floor, agenda, to address key ethics event. The email was sent to my father, to Vera, to the 2 independent pension funds, to the entire board. Condition 3 was met. Somewhere in Northbridge, the 14B packet, unlocked, the files, my perfect, brutal chain of evidence, were now flying through the internet. They were landing in the inboxes of the 2 people on the board my father didn't own, and the 2 investors who feared risk above all else. They were opening them now, on their phones, in their dark homes. They were watching the video. They were reading Vera's text. They were seeing the x-rays. The chain was locked. It was 11:30 p.m. I turned off my monitors. I didn't go home. I leaned back in my ergonomic office chair. I closed my eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the deep, cold ache in my ribs and the throb in my cheek, which still bore the faint, damp imprint of the paper towel I'd pressed to it hours ago. It didn't matter. All the gears were turning. The machine I had built was now running on its own. It would not stop. I fell asleep. The boardroom on the 28th floor was a glass box in the sky. It was 7:30 a.m. on a Sunday. The sun, a cold white disk, was just clearing the horizon, and its first rays sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The light caught the massive, brushed steel logo of the Lane Meridian Group on the far wall, making it gleam with a sterile, almost painful brilliance. The air was chilled, recycled, and silent save for the faint hum of the climate control system. I was already there, seated at the long obsidian black table, my laptop open. In front of me were 7 leather-bound folders, each containing a hard copy of the 14B packet. They arrived together at 7:29 a.m. My father, Graham, walked in first. He wore a dark navy suit, his power uniform, but his silk tie was a somber, muted blue, and he kept adjusting the knot as if it were choking him. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were clouded with a mixture of disbelief and fury. He wouldn't look at me. Vera was a step behind him, a shadow in a tailored black dress. She wore oversized, dark sunglasses, the kind celebrities use to hide from paparazzi. They were absurd in the dim, artificial light of the boardroom. They were a shield, a prop. She walked with a stiff, defiant grace, her hand on my father's arm, not for support, but for show, a display of unity, a united front against the storm. "This is a disgrace, Avery," Graham said, his voice a low growl as he took his seat at the head of the table. "A private family matter." "This is a scheduled meeting of the board, Graham," I replied, my voice even, devoid of any inflection. "Triggered by a provision you signed into effect." Vera slid into the chair beside him. "It was an accident," she said, her voice smooth, rehearsed. Her sunglasses were aimed at me. "A simple family misunderstanding. You were overwrought." The other board members filed in, their faces grim. 2 were my father's loyalists, old men who had been on his payroll for decades. Then came the 2 independents, a retired judge and a former CEO from the tech sector. Finally, the representatives from the 2 largest pension funds that held Lane Meridian stock. They were the ones who mattered. They were not friends. They were fiduciaries, responsible for the retirement funds of thousands of teachers and firefighters. They did not care about family drama. They cared about risk. They had all watched the video. I could see it in the way they deliberately avoided looking at Vera. I stood. "Good morning," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. "As per the notice, this is an emergency special session convened under Clause 14B of the shareholder agreement. The purpose is to address a key ethics event. The evidence has been distributed. For the record, I will summarize. I was brief. I was clinical. I was a machine reading a report. On Friday, October 17th, at 8:39 p.m., a designated senior party, Vera Lane, committed an act of physical assault against a Kestrel North Holdings executive on Lane Meridian Group property, The chain of evidence is as follows. I pointed to the folders. Item 1. A 41-second video file from the Stonebrook Grill ceiling camera, model 4K D2I2 with clear audio. Item 2. The official incident report, number 1117, signed by the restaurant's shift manager. Item 3. The full medical report from Everline Med, case ID EM9902, including X-rays and photographic evidence of the injuries. Item 4. The corporate expense report for the dinner, filed under shareholder relations. And Item 5. A text message from Mrs. Lane, acknowledging the event. I paused. The evidence is verifiable and absolute. Lane Meridian's general counsel, a slick, overpaid man named Harris, cleared his throat. With all due respect, he began, his voice condescending. This board is not a family court. This is a deeply personal dispute being improperly leveraged. He was cut off, not by me. Play the video again, said a calm, firm voice. It was Marcus Thorne, the representative from the State Teachers' Pension Fund. He was a bald, imposing man in his 60s, known for his methodical, almost glacial demeanor. He was looking at the main screen at the front of the room. The audio was quite clear, but I'd like to hear it one more time. Harris's mouth snapped shut. My father's face went pale. I nodded to the tech assistant in the corner. Play Item 1. The large screen flickered to life. The image was high definition. The honey gold light of the restaurant rendered in perfect clarity. There we were, my composed, still face, my father, staring at the wine list, Vera, leaning in. The slap was shockingly loud in the silent, acoustically perfected boardroom. It made two of the directors flinch. Then came her voice, Vera's whisper, captured by the sensitive microphone, filled the room, a venomous, sibilant hiss. You deserved it, just like your real mom did, a lesson you both needed to remember. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier, more damning, than any argument I could have made. The two independent directors, the judge and the tech CEO, both looked down at the polished surface of the table, as if studying their own reflections. They couldn't look at my father. They couldn't look at Vera. Vera sat frozen, her sunglasses no longer a shield, but a confession. I broke the silence. The act itself is a liability, I said, my voice still level. The statement made during the act transforms that liability into a potential catastrophe for this company's brand. It speaks to a history, a pattern. It creates a narrative that our institutional investors, I glanced at Marcus Thorne, will find untenable. I clicked a button on my laptop. The screen lit up again, this time with the dry, dense text of Clause 14b. I highlighted a section in yellow. As per this clause, I continued, upon verification of a key ethics event, this body is empowered to take immediate action to protect the interests of the shareholders. This includes the immediate formation of an independent ethics committee to conduct a full investigation, and the temporary suspension of any involved senior officers or designated parties for a period not to exceed 30 days. Marcus Thorne leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. He didn't need to read the clause. He had already committed it to memory. I believe, he said, his voice resonating with quiet authority, that such action is not only warranted, it is necessary. The reputational damage is already occurring. The financial risk is material. Therefore, I move that we vote to temporarily suspend Graham Lane from his duties as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately, pending the outcome of a full and independent investigation into this matter and the related financial documents provided in the packet. The room seemed to lose all its air. My father stared at Thorne, his mouth slightly agape. He had expected a scolding, a demand for an apology. He had not expected this. He had not expected his own rules to be used to depose him. Vera finally broke. She ripped off her sunglasses, her eyes blazing with a furious, cornered animal panic. You can't, she snapped, her voice high and shrill. This is our company. Graham built this, you ungrateful, manipulative little bitch. She was looking at me, her face contorted with hate. "Vera," my father hissed, grabbing her arm. Her own lawyer, a man who had clearly been hired for this meeting, leaned over and whispered urgently in her ear, "Mrs. Lane, I strongly advise you to remain silent. Any statement you make can be construed as attempting to influence a board proceeding." She fell silent, but her chest was heaving. Her manicured hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the table. "A motion has been made," I said calmly. "Does it have a second?" The retired judge, a woman named Eleanor Vance, raised a single, deliberate finger. "I second the motion." "We will proceed to a vote," I said. "As per the bylaws for a vote of this nature, it will be confidential and electronic. Please use the terminals in front of you." The room was silent as 7 hands moved to 7 touchscreens. It was over in 10 seconds. The results flashed onto the main screen in stark, white text against a blue background. "Motion to temporarily suspend G. Lane as CEO. In favor 5 against 2. Motion carries." It was done. My father stared at the screen, his face slack. The color drained from it. He was no longer the CEO of the company that bore his name. His 2 cronies looked at him helplessly. Before anyone could speak, Marcus Thorne spoke again. "The board has a fiduciary duty to ensure stable leadership during this transitional period. Given the nature of the pending investigation, which involves both ethical and financial matters, I believe we need an interim leader with an unimpeachable understanding of the company's governance and compliance structures." He looked directly at me. "Therefore, I move to appoint Avery Lane as acting CEO for the 30-day investigative period. Her position as head of compliance at Kestrel North demonstrates her expertise, and as the reporting party in this matter, her interests are clearly aligned with a transparent and thorough investigation, not with covering it up." Vera made a choking sound. My father looked as if he had been struck. "This is a conflict of interest," Harris, the general counsel, blurted out. "On the contrary," Judge Vance countered, her voice sharp. "It is the resolution of a conflict. Ms. Lane's primary conflict was her familial relationship. By acting on her duty as a compliance officer, she has proven that her loyalty is to the rule of law and the good of this company, not to her father. She is the only person in this room who is not compromised. I second the motion." "The vote," I said, my heart a cold, steady drum. Again, the silent touchscreens. Again, the text on the screen. "Motion to appoint a Lane as acting CEO. In favor 5 against 2. Motion carries." I looked at my father, at the man who had let this happen, who had watched my mother's light go out and then let this darkness in. I felt nothing, no triumph, no joy, just the quiet, clean satisfaction of a complex mechanism functioning exactly as it was designed. I had just taken his company, and I had used his own rulebook to do it. The title of acting CEO was a key, but not to the executive suite, not yet. The first door I needed to unlock was smaller, colder, and housed in a vault of reinforced steel 2 stories beneath the granite facade of Rivervale Bank. The bank was old Everline money, a place of hushed tones, polished brass, and institutional silence. The manager of the safe deposit vault, a man named Mr. Abernathy, who had been there for 40 years, recognized me instantly. His expression was a carefully neutral mask, but his eyes held a flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or just the weary recognition of another chapter opening in the Lane family's public ledger. He remembered my mother. Everyone of his generation did. "Ms. Lane," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "It's been a long time." "It has, Mr. Abernathy," I replied. I signed the ledger, my signature crisp and exact. He compared it to the signature card on file, a card bearing 2 names, Julia Lane, Avery Lane. My mother had added my name to the box when I was 16, 2 years before she died. "Just a little paperwork," she had told me, her smile bright, but her eyes distant. For a rainy day. The rain had been falling for 14 years. Abernathy used his master key, and then I used mine. The small, silver key felt cold and alien in my hand. It had lived in a hidden compartment of my jewelry box for over a decade, a silent, inert piece of my past. The lock clicked, a sound that seemed to echo in the vault's tomb-like silence. He slid out the long, slim metal box and placed it on the table in the private viewing room. A small, soundproof cubicle with a single chair and a bare desk. Then he left, closing the heavy door behind him, leaving me alone with my mother's last will and testament. It was not a document. It was a curated collection of her pain. I lifted the lid. The box was not full. It contained only 3 items, nestled on a bed of faded black velvet. The first was a small, white plastic cassette, a Sony mini DV tape. It was an artifact from a bygone era of home video, a physical container for digital memories. It felt dense, heavy with the information it held. The second were 3 Polaroid photographs, their colors slightly washed out with age. They weren't of landscapes or smiling faces. The first was a close-up of a woman's upper arm. My mother's arm, identifiable by the small, crescent-shaped scar she'd had since childhood, a constellation of deep, ugly bruises, the color of a dying plum, marred her fair skin. The second photo showed her shoulder, a similar pattern of violence. The third was of her wrist, slender and delicate, circled by the unmistakable imprint of fingers, pressed into her flesh with brutal force. She had taken these photos herself, clinical and unflinching, documenting the damage. The third item was a letter, a single sheet of thick, cream-colored stationery, folded in 3. Her name, Julia, was embossed at the top. I unfolded it. The ink was a faded blue, and her handwriting, a graceful looping cursive I knew as well as my own, filled the page. My dearest Avery, it began. If you are reading this, it means the rainy day has come. I hope it never does. I hope this box gathers dust forever. But hope is not a strategy. And I was never a very good strategist. I was a romantic. And I learned too late that romance is a poor shield against a storm. There are storms in this house, Avery, not the kind with thunder and rain, but the quiet kind, the ones that happen behind closed doors when all the guests have gone home, the kind that leave marks you have to hide with long sleeves. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll be strong enough to walk out into the sunlight, but you, my darling girl, you have a spine of steel I could only ever dream of. I have tried to document the weather here, in my own small way. It is all I can do. Remember this, always. The truth is not a weapon. It is a light. It can be blinding, and people will try to convince you that darkness is safer. It is not. The darkness is where things fester. If you ever need the truth, Avery, do not be afraid of the light. Do not let anyone, not even your father, convince you to stay in the shadows. I love you more than all the stars. Mom. I read it twice. My eyes were dry. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest, a poor shield against a storm. She was wrong. She wasn't a poor strategist. She was a woman trapped, and she had done the only thing she could. She had created an archive. She had left me a map. I put the letter and the photographs back in the box, but I kept the mini DV tape. I took it back to my office, the empty, silent headquarters of the company I now controlled. It took my assistant an hour to locate a working mini DV player from the company's archives, a dusty relic from the era of shareholder videos and cheesy corporate training films. I didn't watch it in my office. I took the player and the tape home to my own apartment, a minimalist space that was the architectural opposite of the house I grew up in. In the quiet of my own living room, I connected the player to my television and inserted the cassette. The mechanical whirring of the tape deck was loud in the silence. I pressed play. The image that flickered onto the screen was shaky, amateurish. It was the kitchen of our old house. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The first sounds were of a normal morning. A coffee pot gurgling, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, then voices. My father's voice, placating, weary. Not the time. Vera, please. And then Vera's, not the syrupy purr she used in public, but a voice I recognized from my childhood nightmares. It was sharp, cold, and serrated. She's undermining me. Graham, with the caterers, with the staff. She looks at me. You know how she looks at me. She's just... Julia, my father said, his voice weak. And I am your wife. A sudden sharp crash off screen. The sound of a plate or a mug shattering against the tile floor. You need to decide who the lady of this house is. The camera, which had been aimed at the floor, suddenly jerked upwards. It panned wildly for a second. A panicked, disoriented movement. It was my mother holding it. She was trying to document the fight, trying to capture the rage. The camera swung past the stainless steel refrigerator and the marble island. And for less than 2 seconds, it captured a reflection in the dark, polished glass of the oven door. It was Vera. Her face was not contorted with anger. There was no heat. It was a mask of pure, cold contempt. Her lips were a thin, hard line. Her eyes were fixed on something, someone, off-screen. My mother. It was the look of a predator that knows it has cornered its prey. It was the truest expression I had ever seen on her face. The camera clattered to the floor, the image spinning into a meaningless blur. The recording ended. I rewound the tape. I watched that 2-second reflection 10 times. Then I looked at the bottom of the screen, burned into the digital footage in stark, blocky, white numbers was the timestamp. June 4th, 2011. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to the day before my mother slipped on the wet rocks at the lake house. 2 weeks before the coroner's report. 2 weeks before my world ended. A hot white wave of fury washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I could release this. I could give this tape to the police, to the press. I could burn them both to the ground with my mother's ghost. But I breathed. I calmed the tremor in my hands. The letter. The truth is not a weapon. It is a light. A weapon is messy. A light is precise. It illuminates. Releasing the tape now would be seen as the act of a grieving, vengeful daughter. It would be personal. It would muddy the clear. Cold. Corporate waters I was navigating. The fraud. The assault. Those were business. This was something else. This was a foundation. This was the origin story. I spent the next 2 hours in my home office, digitizing the mini DV tape into a high-resolution, encrypted file. I labeled it JL Archive 060411. I packaged it, along with scanned copies of the photos and the letter, and placed them on the secure Axiom server, in a separate, sealed digital vault. Then, as acting CEO, I drafted a memo to the newly formed Independent Ethics Committee. To the committee, I wrote, as part of your due diligence in investigating the recent key ethics event, I recommend you retain an independent, external investigator to review historical executive conduct. We have come across archival materials, specifically dated June 4, 2011, which suggest a possible pattern of hostile behavior and workplace safety concerns involving senior parties. A full review of all records from that period is warranted to ensure a complete understanding of the corporate culture we are now tasked with reforming. I didn't send them the tape, I just sent them the map. I gave them the date. I pointed the light into the darkness and let them find their own way. That night, I sat in my own kitchen. I couldn't sleep. The small green power light on my refrigerator glowed in the dark. It looked like a tiny, vigilant camera, a silent witness. And I finally understood. The punch at Stonebrook Grill wasn't just an assault on me. It was an echo. Vera wasn't just trying to put me in my place. She was trying to reinforce a narrative she had built 14 years ago. A narrative where my mother was weak, deserving of her fate. She wasn't just hitting me. She was hitting my mother's memory. She was assaulting the official history of the city's most beloved family. I closed my eyes, in my notebook. Before turning off the light, I wrote a single line. Truth doesn't hurry. It just has to not die. My mother had kept it alive for me. Now, it was my turn to let it see the sun. Money is like water. It is meant to flow along predictable channels, irrigating the corporate landscape, but when it is diverted, it doesn't just disappear. It pools in the dark. It carves new, secret paths, and if you follow its trail, it will always lead you to the rot. The Independent Ethics Committee, led by the retired Judge Eleanor Vance, did not waste time. My preliminary report on Hearthline Services, included as the final exhibit in the 14B packet, was their map. They didn't have to search for the trail. They just had to follow it. They hired a team of forensic accountants, sharp, bloodless men and women who spoke the language of ledgers and routing numbers. By Tuesday morning, less than 48 hours after the emergency board meeting, they had their answer. It was presented in a sterile 10-page summary. The committee had subpoenaed the complete invoicing and payment history between the Lane Meridian Group and Hearthline Services. They found what I knew they would find: $2.4 million paid out over 3 quarters for vaguely defined consulting and design services at Stonebrook Grill and 2 other Lane properties. The invoices were phantom documents, padded with industry jargon, but devoid of specific deliverables. The 2 procurement employees, when brought before the committee, folded within minutes. They confessed to approving the invoices on the direct, verbal order of Vera Lane. But the accountants dug deeper. They followed the water. The payments to Hearthline Services were deposited into a corporate account at a regional bank. From there, the money didn't stay. It was immediately, automatically, transferred out in smaller structured amounts to a second account, a private wealth management account at a different, out-of-state bank, chosen for its discretion. The name on that final, ultimate beneficiary account was not Hearthline Services. It was a personal account. It belonged to V. Quinn. The report was delivered to my office. I read the name on the page. Vera's maiden name. The link was no longer circumstantial. It was a direct, documented, and irrefutable line. She had not just influenced employees. She had personally, financially, benefited from the fraud. The water had reached its destination. Now it was my turn to build the dam. I spent Tuesday afternoon not in the CEO's office. I left it empty, a symbolic vacuum of power. But in the company's legal archives, I wasn't looking for personnel files. I was looking for debt. Specifically, the master credit facility agreement for the 3 restaurants involved in the Hearthline fraud. Lane Meridian had taken out a significant loan to finance their renovations 3 years prior. I had read the agreement then. As part of Kestrel's due diligence, I already knew what was inside. It was another clause, buried deep in the document's boilerplate, Clause 7C. Like my own Clause 14B, it was designed to be overlooked. It was a creditor protection covenant. It stated that if the borrower, Lane Meridian Group, was found to be engaged in A, significant financial malfeasance or fraud, and B, a senior officer was involved in a serious, publicly verifiable ethical violation that could materially harm the brand's reputation, the lender had the right to accelerate the debt, to call the loan, to demand immediate, full repayment of the entire outstanding balance. It was a corporate death sentence. One trigger alone wasn't enough, but together, fraud and a public ethics scandal, they were the 2 keys required to turn the lock. Vera's greed had provided the first key. Her violence had provided the second. There was one more piece I needed, the bridge between the 2. At 3:00 p.m., I drafted a legal memorandum and sent it to the Ethics Committee and the board. Subject: breach of fiduciary duty and commingling of assets. The memorandum outlined a simple, brutal legal argument. When Graham Lane paid for the dinner at Stonebrook Grill with his corporate card, he was using a company asset. During that dinner, a violent act was committed by his designated senior party, Vera. By expensing that specific event, Graham had effectively commingled corporate assets with illicit personal conduct. He had made the company pay for the crime. This was a textbook breach of his fiduciary duty to protect the shareholders from risk. The assault was no longer a personal matter. It was now a fraudulent corporate transaction. At 3:30 p.m., I picked up my phone. I didn't call a board member. I called the bank. I called the vice president of commercial risk at the institution that held the loan for the restaurants. His name was Peterson. We had met once, years ago. "Mr. Peterson?" I said, my voice calm and professional. "This is Avery Lane. I'm the acting CEO of the Lane Meridian Group." There was a brief pause. He had heard the news. "Ms. Lane, this is unexpected. What can I do for you?" "I'm calling as a matter of fiduciary duty and creditor notification," I said. "Pursuant to our credit agreement, I am obligated to inform you that an internal investigation has confirmed significant financial malfeasance connected to the assets under your lien. I am also obligated to inform you of a concurrent, publicly verifiable ethics violation involving a senior party." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Peterson was a banker. He was a creature of pure risk analysis. I had just used all his trigger words. "I am sending you a secure file," I continued. "It contains the preliminary findings of our independent ethics committee and the supporting documentation. It includes the fraud report and the evidence of the ethics violation. I believe you'll find it directly relevant to Clause 7C of our agreement." "Clause 7C, he repeated, his voice suddenly tight. He knew exactly what it was. "We believe in full transparency with our financial partners," I said. "Lane Meridian, under its new leadership, is committed to cleaning this up. I wanted you to have the full picture as you assess the bank's position." "I understand," he said. "Thank you for the notification. Ms. Lane, I will review the file immediately." I hung up. I had not made a threat. I had simply presented a fact. I had shown a predator that his investment was wounded, and I had handed him the contractual weapon to put it out of its misery or, more likely, to take control of it. The fallout was faster than I expected. At 4:15 p.m., my father called me. His voice was frantic, a tone I had never heard from him before. "Avery, what have you done? The bank called. They're talking about calling the loan. This will destroy us." "I have a duty to inform our creditors of material risk, Graham," I said. "It's the law. We can fix this. I can rescind my vote from Sunday. We can undo the suspension," he pleaded. "It's not about the suspension anymore," I said, my voice cold. "The covenants in the loan agreement have been triggered. The bank's rights are now in effect. It is out of your hands. It is out of my hands. It is in the hands of the lawyers." The pension funds must have gotten a call from the bank as well. At 4:30 p.m., Marcus Thorne requested another emergency session of the board. The agenda: to discuss immediate leadership restructuring in light of new information regarding financial instability and creditor risk. They were no longer content to wait 30 days. They smelled a fire, and they wanted to get out of the building before it collapsed. The world outside the boardroom was catching up. At 4:45 p.m., I received a call from Lila Vance at Linden & Fox. "A Detective Miller from the Everline PD called me," she said. "He received a copy of the Stonebrook incident report and your medical file from the ethics committee. He'd like to schedule a formal interview with your client, Vera Lane, for tomorrow afternoon. He said the words assault and battery were mentioned." "Thank you for letting me know," I said. My last act of the day was quiet, procedural. At 5 p.m., I had a courier deliver a file to the Everline County Courthouse. It was a petition for a temporary restraining order against Vera Lane. I cited the assault at the restaurant and the historical evidence of her hostile behavior, using the language from my memo to the committee. A judge would sign it by morning. She would not be allowed within 500 feet of me, my home, or my office. I shut down my computer. The office was dark. Outside, the city lights began to glitter. Every action had been a reaction, a necessary next step dictated by the rules of the system. A punch in a restaurant required a medical report. A corporate card required an expense filing. A fraudulent invoice required a forensic audit. A loan agreement required a risk notification. An assault required a police report. A threat required a restraining order. Each one was a separate gear, but now they were all connected. I could hear them meshing, one catching the other. the teeth locking into place. The machine was turning, driven by the simple, brutal force of cause and effect, and it was moving in only one direction. Monday evening was a performance. The stage was the grand, three-story atrium of the Lane Meridian Tower, a cathedral of glass and steel. Outside, the night was a dark velvet pinned with the thousand lights of Everline. Inside, the light was sharp, white, and unforgiving. The enormous, custom-designed chandeliers, which Vera had once proudly described to a magazine as frozen meteors, hung in the vast space, inert and cold. This was not a dinner, it was a company-wide town hall, called by me, the acting CEO. Every employee in the city had been invited. Most had come. They stood in a wide, silent semicircle, their faces upturned, a mosaic of curiosity and fear. Against the far glass wall, a solid bank of them, was the press. They had been allowed into the atrium, but roped off. A pack of hungry wolves held back by a thin velvet rope. Their cameras were poised, their long-lensed flashes creating a silent, strobing lightning storm against the glass. They couldn't hear us yet, but they could see everything. We were all fish in a brightly lit bowl. I walked onto the low, temporary stage at precisely 7 p.m. I wore a simple, dark gray dress. My only jewelry was my watch. The bruise on my cheek had faded to a sickly yellow-green, and I had not covered it with makeup. I wanted them to see it. I wanted it to be part of the official record. I stepped up to the podium. The microphone was live. The gentle hiss of the sound system was the only noise in the cavernous space. "Good evening," I began, my voice clear and amplified, echoing slightly in the vast hall. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. My name is Avery Lane, and as of Sunday morning, I am the acting chief executive officer of this company." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. "I know there are rumors. I know there is uncertainty. I am here to provide clarity. Lane Meridian is entering a new era, effective immediately, an era of absolute, unshakable integrity." I paused, letting the words land. "To that end, I am announcing a 90-day integrity initiative. For the next 3 months, every contract, every expense report, and every executive policy will be under full review. We are launching a fully funded, completely anonymous third-party channel for reporting any and all workplace abuse, harassment, or ethical breaches, past or present. There will be no retaliation. There will only be action." I saw a few people exchange glances, a spark of something, hope, maybe, in their eyes. "Furthermore," I continued, "we are establishing a restitution program. Any employee who has suffered financial or personal hardship due to documented ethical breaches by past or present management will be made whole. This company will no longer profit from pain." Suddenly, a disturbance near the front of the stage. My father, who had been standing with the other board members, stepped forward. He walked to the second microphone, set up for a Q&A I had no intention of holding. "Avery," he said, his voice strained, trying for a tone of fatherly concern that sounded grotesque in this public forum. "This is not the place. These are internal family matters, a private disagreement." His voice was a desperate attempt to shrink the world, to pull this massive corporate crisis back into the soundproof dining room where it had begun. He was trying to rebrand a crime as a squabble. I did not look at him. I simply reached down to the control panel on the podium. I pressed a single button. A small red light next to the label MIC2 went dark. His voice was cut off mid-sentence. He tapped the microphone, a pathetic, hollow sound echoing through the hall. He looked at me, his face a ruin of confusion and betrayal. I had silenced the patriarch. The crowd was utterly still, watching the public castration of their leader. As if on cue, a new commotion started at the main entrance. The crowd parted. Vera. She swept in, flanked by her new, expensive lawyer, a man with a face like a clenched fist. She was not wearing sunglasses. Her face was a mask of cold, imperious fury. She marched directly towards the stage. "I want a public apology," she announced, her voice ringing out. not needing a microphone. She was projecting, performing. For the slander, for the lies, for this corporate coup, orchestrated by a resentful child. She was magnificent in her delusion. She truly believed she was the victim, that she was the one who had been wronged. Her lawyer stepped forward, holding up a hand as if to stop an imaginary assailant. My client is here to demand a retraction of the defamatory statements. He never got to finish his sentence. Two figures, quiet and purposeful, entered behind them. They were not dressed in corporate attire. They were detectives, their badges clipped to their belts, their expressions weary and professional. One of them, a man with gray hair and tired eyes, approached Vera. "Vera Lane?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. Vera's head snapped towards him, her performance momentarily forgotten. "Yes?" "I'm Detective Miller, Everline PD," he said. He held out a folded piece of paper. "I have a summons for you. We need you to come downtown to answer some questions regarding an assault complaint filed against you. The incident at Stonebrook Grill on Friday night." The color drained from Vera's face. Her lawyer sputtered, stepping between them. "My client will not be answering any questions without—" I held up a hand. The hall fell silent again. "Perhaps," I said into the microphone, my voice cool and clear. "A little context is in order." I nodded to the technician. The massive screen behind me, which had been displaying the Lane Meridian logo, went black. Then it lit up. It was the video from the restaurant. I had instructed the tech to remove the audio. I didn't need it. The violence was eloquent enough on its own. For 15 seconds, the entire company, the entire press corps, watched in absolute silence. They saw the tight grip on my wrist under the table. They saw Vera lean in. They saw her hand rise, a blur of motion. They saw it connect with my cheek. They saw my head snap to the side. They saw her lean in again, her face a mask of smug satisfaction as she whispered her poison. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a silence of shock, of disgust, of dawning, horrified comprehension. Then, from the side of the stage, Judge Eleanor Vance, one of the independent directors, stepped forward. She looked out, not at me, but at the sea of employee faces. Her voice was thick with emotion. "On behalf of the board," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I want to apologize. To every one of you. We should have known. We should have acted sooner. This kind of behavior has no place in this company. It has no place anywhere." A single person began to clap, a young woman in the marketing department, then another, and another. The applause started as a scattered patter, like the first drops of rain, and then it grew, swelling into a wave, a roar that filled the giant hall. It wasn't for me. It was for the truth. It was the sound of a long-held breath being released. During the applause, I turned to the small table on the stage. I picked up 2 folders. I opened one, took out a single sheet of paper, and signed it. The termination notice for the senior VP of procurement. I did the same with the second folder, the manager. I handed both folders to the head of HR, who was standing by. "Please have their files, along with the complete Hearthline Services audit, sent to the district attorney's office in the morning," I said, my voice too low for the microphone to catch. The applause died down. The detectives were speaking quietly to Vera's lawyer. My father stood frozen, a statue of a man who had just watched his world burn down. Outside, the flashes from the press cameras were a frantic, desperate frenzy. They could see the police. They could see Vera's face. They knew. Inside, the only sound was the soft, mechanical whir of the projector fan as it began to cool. The battle was over. Vera turned from the detectives. She looked at me. Her eyes narrowed to slits. Her mask of fury had been replaced by something colder, something that cut deeper. She gave me a small, twisted smile. "You'll be alone, Avery," she said, her voice a low, venomous promise. "You've burned down your own family. You'll have this big, empty company, and you will be utterly alone." I looked at her, I looked at the woman who had terrorized my mother and haunted my life. I looked at the bruise on my face in the reflection of the dark screen behind me. Better alone, I said, than an accomplice. After the noise, there was silence. After the public execution in the grand atrium, there was this small, windowless room on the 27th floor. It was an auxiliary meeting room, a place for minor negotiations and overflow work, a room utterly devoid of grandeur. The walls were a neutral beige. The lighting was a soft, forgiving yellow from a single recessed fixture, a stark contrast to the surgical white light of the main hall. There was a simple wooden table and 4 chairs. There were no microphones. There were no cameras. It was a confessional, an interrogation room, a tomb. I was already inside, waiting, when my father was escorted to the door by Judge Vance. She gave me a brief, steady nod, then closed the door, leaving the two of us alone. The click of the latch was the only sound. He didn't look like the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire anymore. His suit, which had seemed like armor an hour ago, now looked like a costume that was a size too large. His shoulders were slumped. The fury and disbelief from the morning's board meeting had evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, gray exhaustion. He looked old. He looked like a man who had been running for a very long time and had just tripped over the finish line. He didn't sit. He walked to the far wall and stood there, his back to me, staring at a framed, abstract print of blue and gray swirls that meant nothing. I waited. The silence was a physical presence in the room. It was the accumulated weight of every lie, every evasion, every moment he had looked away. Finally, he turned. His face was a wreck. "Are you happy?" he asked. His voice was not angry. It was a dry, rasping whisper, the sound of ashes. "Are you satisfied? You've dethroned your own father." The question was a cliché. It was the last, desperate gambit of a guilty man trying to reframe his downfall as a personal betrayal, a petty family squabble. He was trying to make me the villain of his story. I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I reached into the leather folder on the table in front of me. I bypassed the stacks of legal documents, the suspension agreements, the cooperation pledges. I took out a single, folded sheet of cream-colored stationery. The paper was old, soft to the touch. I placed it in the center of the table. His eyes were drawn to it. He knew the paper. He knew the embossed Julia at the top. He knew the handwriting, even from across the room. He approached the table slowly, as if drawn by a force he couldn't resist. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down heavily. He didn't look at me. He looked at the letter. For a full minute, he just stared at it, at the familiar, graceful loops of my mother's script. Then, with a hand that visibly trembled, he reached out. He didn't open it. He just touched the edge of the paper with the tips of his fingers. A tentative, almost reverent gesture. It was the ghost of a caress. She used to say the truth would kill us," he whispered. His gaze was fixed on the letter. But I knew he was seeing my mother's face. He was back in that house, in those quiet, terrible rooms. The memory of Friday night, of Vera's fist connecting with my ribs, was a sudden, cold clarity in my mind. It was the same pain, the same casual cruelty, that my mother must have felt. That punch wasn't just a moment in time, it was a key. It unlocked a door I had been standing in front of my whole life. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room's dead air. "You're wrong. You've had it wrong all this time." He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and confused. "Silence is what kills," I said. "Silence killed her. Silence almost killed this company. Your silence. Graham, that's the poison. You let the darkness fester because you were afraid of the light." I leaned forward slightly. "Every time you told me Vera was just stressed, every time you looked away when she dug her nails into my arm, every time you signed one of her fraudulent expense reports without asking a single question, that was the silence. It was a choice. You made it over and over again, for 14 years. He flinched, the words hitting him with more force than any physical blow. "She knew," I said, nodding toward the letter. She knew the truth wasn't a weapon. She said it was a light, and she left it for me, hoping I'd be strong enough to turn it on. That's what I did. Graham, I just opened the curtains. He slumped in his chair, all the fight gone out of him. He looked down at his hands on the table. They were the hands of an old man. I loved her, he murmured, his voice cracking. I did. I know, I said, and the terrible thing was, I believed him. He had loved her, but he had loved his comfort more. He had loved his peace and quiet more. He had loved his second miracle more, because Vera demanded nothing of him but his complicity. While my mother had demanded his courage, it was a test he had failed. I pushed the other documents across the table towards him. The official agreement of his temporary suspension, the pledge to cooperate fully with the independent investigation. It's time to sign the papers, I said, my tone shifting back to the professional, the procedural, the acting CEO. He picked up the pen I'd placed there. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen, his own. He uncapped it. The nib scratched loudly against the paper as he signed his name, the signature that had once built an empire, now signing away its throne. He pushed the documents back to me. It was done. I stood up. I'm not doing this to punish you, I said, and it was the truest thing I had said all night. This isn't about happiness or satisfaction. This is about compliance. He looked up at me, his face a question. I didn't dethrone you, Graham, I said, my voice flat, final. I saved the company from you, from your weakness, from your silence. I did my job. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He just gave a single, slow nod. It was a gesture of profound, absolute defeat. It was the look of an old, weathered ship, battered by a storm of its own making, finally surrendering to the rope that would tie it to the shore. Safe, but captive, its sailing days were over. I turned and walked to the door. I put my hand on the cool metal handle. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to say. There were no more documents to sign, no more clauses to invoke. The legal battle was over. The personal one had ended long ago, leaving only this empty, echoing ruin. I opened the door. The stark, white light from the hallway flooded into the dim, yellow room. It was so bright it was almost blinding. It washed over everything, bleaching the color from the walls, the table. It fell across my father, and for a moment, his features were completely blurred, lost in the glare. He was just a silhouette, a ghost at a table, trapped in the past. I stepped out of the room and into the light, leaving him behind in the shadows. The door clicked shut behind me. I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the marble floor beneath my feet, that whatever had been left between us, whatever broken pieces of a family still remained, they were not the kind of thing you could fix with a public relations campaign. They couldn't be fixed at all. When I stepped down from the stage, the great hall was a study in contrasts. A pocket of profound, almost reverent silence surrounded me, while the perimeter of the room was a storm of contained chaos. The detectives, their work done with a quiet, practiced efficiency, were escorting Vera and her lawyer toward the main entrance. She didn't struggle. She didn't scream. All the fight had gone out of her. She walked with a stiff, chilling dignity, a queen being led from a palace she had already burned to the ground. The moment they passed the velvet rope line, the storm broke. The press surged forward, a wall of shouting questions and exploding flashbulbs. The flashes were relentless, a barrage of white light that turned the scene into a series of stark, disjointed photographs. Vera's pale, tight face, her lawyer's hand on her arm, the detective's impassive profile. It was a meteor shower in reverse, a million tiny stars of light imploding on a single point of darkness. I watched them go, but I felt nothing. It was not my victory. It was simply the logical conclusion of a process she had initiated with a clenched fist. I turned away from the spectacle. My work was not finished. While the world watched the drama, I returned to the silent, empty 28th floor, in the main boardroom, the scene of my ascension, A single light burned over the obsidian table. 2 documents were waiting for me. The first was an executive order authorizing a full, unrestricted forensic audit of the Lane Meridian Group and all its subsidiaries. Going back 10 years, I picked up the heavy, black fountain pen, my father's pen, and signed my name at the bottom. The signature was firm, a clean, sharp line of black ink on white paper. The second document was a formal directive to the company's general counsel. It instructed them to compile the complete 14B packet, along with the new findings from the internal audit and the sworn testimony of the procurement staff, and deliver the entire unredacted package to the office of the Everline County District Attorney by 9 a.m. the next morning. It was a formal referral for criminal prosecution. I signed that one, too. There was no hesitation. As I was placing the signed documents into a courier envelope, my phone chimed softly with a new email. The subject line was simply, "Thank you." It was from the hostess at Stonebrook Grill. Ms. Lane. The email read, "I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the news. We all did. For years. We've been told to write things in the incident log, and we always felt like we were just writing into the void. You made that logbook mean something. You made us feel like we weren't invisible. Thank you for that." It was the one thing all night that threatened to breach my composure. It was a small, quiet voice from the real world, a world outside boardrooms and legal clauses, a world where a young woman doing her job had been forced to witness something ugly and had been given back a piece of her own agency. I took a moment, then I typed a simple reply. "You were the witness. I was just the instrument. Thank you for your integrity." I hit send. Later. I don't know how much later. I found myself standing before the great glass wall of the atrium, looking down at the city. The news vans were still there, small blinking lights in the darkness. But the crowds were gone. The silence had returned. On the glass, I could see my own reflection, a faint, ghostly silhouette against the glittering expanse of Everline. Superimposed over my reflection was the company logo etched into the glass, a stylized LMG. But something was different. The maintenance crew had already been at work. The small, elegant script beneath the logo, the line that had read, "A Graham Lane Company," had been carefully, professionally removed. The glass where his name had been was now just clean, clear, and empty. "Ms. Lane?" The voice was young, hesitant. I turned. It was a junior analyst from the finance department. A young man I recognized from meetings but whose name I didn't know. He couldn't have been more than 25. He was holding a stack of files, clearly working late. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, earnest second before flicking down to the floor. "For calling it what it was, for not letting them call it a family matter. It matters. To people like us. Thank you." He nodded awkwardly, then hurried away down the long, silent corridor, leaving me alone again with my reflection. A faint smile touched my lips. It was not a smile of happiness, but of acknowledgement. I raised my hand and gently touched the bruise on my cheek. It was tender. The colors now a pale, washed-out yellow and green. It was the last visible trace of the storm. In another week, the physical mark would be gone completely, vanished as if it had never been. The skin would heal, but the record, the reports, the videos, the files, those were permanent. The evidence would never fade. I walked back to the podium in the now empty atrium. The microphone was still live. I imagined the faces of all the employees, the hostess, the young analyst. I leaned in, speaking to the empty hall, to the ghosts and the echoes. I made one final, company-wide statement. "No one," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of an unbreakable law, "deserves violence. No one is above the law." I heard the words echo back at me from the far walls, a promise made and kept. And from the assembled board members and the few remaining senior staff who had stayed behind, a sound began. It was not the thunderous, emotional roar from before. It was a steady, respectful applause. It was the sound of a new foundation being laid, stone by solid stone. It was the sound of order being restored, the sound of light filling a dark room. It rose, echoing off the high glass ceilings, a final, definitive seal on the end of an era. I stepped away from the podium. I walked back to the boardroom, the applause fading behind me. The final scene is not in the great hall. It's not in the glare of the cameras. It's here, in the quiet, brightly lit boardroom. On the clean, white surface of the table sits the master file folder for the entire case. It is thick with reports, statements, and evidence. My hand enters the frame. I place the final signed document, the referral to the district attorney, on top of the stack. Then, I close the cover. The sound is soft, but final. A soft thud of cardboard on paper. My fingers smooth the cover. On the stark white label, typed in clean, black, sans serif font, are 2 words and a letter. 14B closed. The frame holds on the file, bathed in the clean, white light. Then, black. Thank you for listening to our story. We'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with our community. Don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and give it a boost by hitting the hype button to help more people hear this story.